Thank you, Johannes, and hello from Copenhagen. We just had an electricity breakdown a few minutes ago here in this part of the city, but I hope you can hear me and that will work out already. The DINNOCAP project is about to be finalized, but I would like to give you a few examples of some preliminary observations that we made. One of the key learnings based on surveys and discussions with industry have been that even though the countries in this region are generally very digitally advanced, many SMEs are still not using digital technologies, and many of them are not even aware of the opportunities. But it's not only in this region. In 2020, only 60% of SMEs in the EU has actually adopted digital technologies, according to the European Commission. And the ambition is that by 2030, at least 90% should use digital technologies. But how to get there? Together with industry representatives, we have identified some of the challenges that make digitization more complex for SMEs. And the most obvious ones seem to be the lack of access to funding, lack of access to competences and know-how, lack of adequate infrastructure. We have organized thematic seminars to discuss with industry how to address these challenges and how to encourage SMEs to go further. And in particular, we've been looking for transnational solutions. And also we noticed there was an interest for exploring advanced and emerging technologies like 5G, cybersecurity, and AI. So we've added that to the list of thematic seminars. Another observation made in the DINNOCAP project that DINNOCAP is building on is that there is a need for raising awareness and providing low-key practical tools for SMEs. And that's why partners have jointly developed tools to support the SMEs in their digital journey. And DINNOCAP has taken this one step further. We have met companies in their industrial practice, and the SMEs have been actually involved in testing and evaluating these tools, guided by our industry partners. We will hear more about that in the next session. Back to the challenges for SMEs digitization, I'd like to just briefly mention two examples of what we observe. The first example relates to funding digital transformation of SMEs. It seems to be an issue for SMEs in the entire region, in all 9 countries involved in this project. Also, SME digitization is mainly financed by bank loans, which can be heavy and non-flexible for the individual SME. We also noticed that public support is mostly based on annual budgets, and that may complicate long-term planning for SMEs. And there is, of course, also a lack of venture capital, and that's in particular in the eastern part of the Baltic Sea region. And finally, there seems to be not much coordination of funding opportunities across the countries or between countries. Legislation and policies are not coherent across borders, and that makes it more difficult for SMEs to operate across borders. And what have we done then? We tried to get a snapshot of how the countries are planning to utilize the new EU funds recovering the economy, the RFF, regarding digital transformation of SMEs, just to get an idea about what are the countries planning to do. And some of the examples, some of the trends we noticed was that digitizing industry is not necessarily in focus, and SMEs even less. We also noticed that direct investments in SME digitization is generally not an intention. Instead, digital transition will be based on broad strategies or broader roadmaps. There's nothing wrong with that. But in general, public sector digitization is a priority. And of course, that can indirectly benefit the SMEs but also indirect and non-bureaucratic access to funding of their first steps into digitization is often what SMEs crucially need to get started. Some of the ideas that came up during these discussions was that national funding schemes should be better coordinated across borders. It could be, for example, an interministerial body like the Nordic Baltic MR Digital that could coordinate the national instruments and provide some transparency. It could also be to establish open macro-regional support structures for SMEs operating in the neighboring countries, provided that they collaborate with the local companies. And then also there is a potential in the upcoming European digital innovation hubs to offer, for example, transnational vouchers for services to SMEs in the neighboring countries. Another example of what we've done relates to the value of 5G technologies for SMEs. We observed that big companies, they often have access to in-house competences within 5G technologies, but it's less clear how SMEs can get these advantages. And some big companies, they have their own 5G networks. How can the SMEs get access to their knowledge and their technology? What we did was that we tried to explore examples of why and how SMEs can use 5G in their business. We introduced and exchanged a few use cases from industrial practice in the neighboring countries. And it's interesting to notice that only a few use cases have actually been realized so far. Many of them are in the pipeline, but they are, that means they are sort of provided as examples remaining to be realized. Some of the conclusions were that there is a huge unexplored business potential for SMEs, that's for sure. But also we could build, at least there is a need to build 5G ecosystems where SMEs can enter new value chains and where they can understand their role in the ecosystems. And there's also, of course, there's always a need to tell the good stories, to provide the good use cases, to inspire. But that's only part of it. That must be accompanied by guidance or advice and ideas on how to adapt the individual SME to their specific situation when it comes to using these technologies. And that's where we think the industry associations can play a role to guide their members. It could also be better use of the emerging cross-border test beds, and they could cover several BSR countries where the SMEs or where the test beds could share the know-how for SMEs. And also in this context, the European digital innovation hubs can hopefully play a role when they are up and running in the coming years. One of the conclusions were also that these networks that were built throughout the DINNO and the DINNOCAP projects, they serve as platforms for collaboration. And a way to promote 5G technologies among SMEs could be to build cross-border platforms for that purpose. One of the good examples could be the Latvian 5G Territory that brings together key players. There's some inspiration to build on in that context. So another question that we have briefly touched upon in the project is whether there is a digital gap between the SMEs in the eastern part and the western part of the region. And also, of course, if projects can help bridging that gap. If we look at the Digital Economy and Society Index, the latest one from the European Commission published this year, and these figures are 2020 figures, there are indications that there is still a gap. If you look at the sort of basic level of, or how many SMEs have digitized to a basic level, you will find that there are more SMEs that have reached that level in the Western countries, the western part of the Baltic Sea region, the Nordic countries. If you compare it to the eastern part, the Baltic states and Poland. And at the project level, we have not been able to get to dig deeper into that or into the statistics. But there seem to be slightly different approaches when it comes to SME digitization in the eastern and the western part of the region. But what we all have in common is a clear need for awareness raising for SMEs taking on digital transformation. But awareness should not just be consciousless adoption of new technologies. It must be aware of how the new technologies can create value, to quote my good colleague Douglas A. Williams. To finalize, I would say that based on a few years of project collaboration, the answer is yes, cross-border collaboration can support digital capacity building. I have picked here a few testimonials from the DINNOCAP project on how project partners actually see the added value of this kind of collaboration. And as you can see here, people say that industry and government can meet and talk across borders, which is a quite new experience for most of us. And we get to know the digital challenges and the solutions and the new ways of thinking across the borders and what's going on in the neighboring countries. We realize that, and we actually test method that works in one country, they may also work in another country. There's something to build on here. That's the practical experience. And if some of the instruments in some of the countries are not adequate or don't address the real needs of the SMEs, then maybe we can develop some cross-border instruments that will take us further. And also, it seems that developing practical solutions in combination with the policy discussions, which we've actually had, will make it clear for all of us how policies can be supportive and be helpful and efficient. So I think this is efficient capacity building for partners across the region. But now we will dig deeper into capacity building and hear what came out of the what came out of the practical activities that were made with SMEs. That's for the next session to deal with. Thank you so much.